So I'm sure some of you have noticed there's been an increase in these type of videos on the channel. And the reason for that is mainly that when I come up here and walk around, I'm always doing a lot of thinking and I get ideas floating around in my head. And if I have my camera with me, it's a good way to get them down before I forget about what it is that I was looking to say. So really, this is just as much for me as it is for the viewers. And I was thinking about the concept of being, or at least labeling yourself, open-minded. Now, there's a lot of people that do this, and there's always the whole open-minded versus closed-minded debate. And the interesting thing to me is that I've never called myself one or the other. I think it's kind of a pointless label, and we'll get into that. But in my experience, the open-minded people are usually the first ones to call other people closed-minded. And just the other day, I came across the message somebody sent me. And I don't remember the whole thing off the top of my head, but basically it was telling me how closed-minded I was, and basically virtue signaling about how open-minded they were, simply because they thought being open-minded was a good thing. And I guess open-minded usually means that you're tolerant, you're accepting. And what's funny about that is you're telling someone how tolerant and accepting you are by labeling yourself as open-minded. You're open to new ideas, differing lifestyles, all that kind of stuff. And yet, here you are telling someone that due to their thoughts, or at least what you perceive their thoughts to be in their character, that they are closed-minded and that their way of thought is objectively wrong. And they don't see the disconnect here, where that would be, by their own logic, what a so-called closed-minded person would say. People seem to think that just because they label themselves a certain thing, that it's accurate. In my personal opinion, nobody is truly open-minded to the extent that they are just accepting and tolerant of everything. We all have some level of standards that we live by and follow, and we all have something that we consider unacceptable. And that's okay. That's my point. I think that it's okay to acknowledge now that we all have our limits. We all have things that we think are good and think are bad. And that's how we live our lives and make our decisions. I don't think that's controversial by any means, and yet, with the acceptance and tolerance narrative, people these days trip over themselves just to make it look like they are inherently good and accepting and tolerant. But being tolerant doesn't necessarily automatically mean that you're a good person. I mean, there are things that most of society agrees upon are unacceptable. I mean, you've got murder, you've got rape, and yes, those are very extreme examples, but it only goes to demonstrate that we all draw lines in the sand as to what we consider acceptable behavior or thought. And I think that's okay. I think it's a good thing to have standards. I think it's a good thing to pass judgments. Now, you can obviously argue that there are some shallow judgments that people make, and it's based off of things that a person can't control about themselves. But to say that you don't judge, or you're not intolerant of anything, you accept everybody, is usually flat out false. And it always comes out from the people that label themselves as these open-minded, accepting individuals. But they are the first ones to tell you that your way is wrong, that being an open person is superior to being a closed-off person, and yet they don't have the self-awareness to realize that they are closed off to whatever idea it is that you're sharing that they don't like. And that's the part that really bothers me about all this. It's that somebody can simply label themselves a certain way, and they believe it puts them on this moral pedestal, when it's really your actions, your behavior, and your character that determines your value. So just calling yourself something and pretending that you're so open and accepting doesn't mean anything if your behavior doesn't display that when it really comes down to it. And more often than not, in my experience, it doesn't, because I've always had these people in my life that consider themselves to be open-minded, and yet I'll say something or have an opinion that they disagree with, and then they start to treat me as though I am a lesser person because of that. So much for being tolerant and accepting, right? And that's pretty much what I had to say about this topic. I find it silly to call yourself an open-minded person just because it really seems to be a way to appear superior to people that you think aren't as tolerant and accepting as you are, thus by extension not making you the tolerant person you claim to be. Thanks for listening.
I'm the